Here we are for another round of the 70s versus the 90s, and it's women in divorce when I put Paul Mazursky's An Unmarried Woman against Hugh Wilson's The First Wives Club. And now, this one was a very interesting one to get through. And, because definitely one, it's all about women and divorce. And of course, I'm not a woman and I've never been married, but I do know what great cinema is, and I do know what great writing is, and I do know what great acting is. So, this is what the 70s versus 90s is all about, is what is the better movie. So, let's dive right on in to the nitty and the picky. First up, we have Paul Mazursky's An Unmarried Woman, starring Jill Clayburgh as the titular character. An unmarried woman. What that title comes from is that something that Paul Mazursky had seen written on a form or for marital status. This is an unmarried woman, which basically means a divorced woman. And the film opens. Joe Clayburgh. She's married to my Robert Altman regular Michael Murphy, and he probably is playing a bigger bitch than he played in Woody Allen's Manhattan, which is a previous matchup I did, Manhattan versus High Fidelity. Be sure to check that out. And but when he was in Altman films, he didn't really play a bitch. In this one, he plays a super bitch because we kind of see how their marriage is. It's a bit stale. But you can tell that she's definitely in love with him, but there's something up with him, and then we find out he fell in love with another woman. Age old story. Where she's younger, and he wants a divorce, and this absolutely devastates Jill Clayburgh's character, so but the beautiful thing about this character, she don't take no shit. Like she is one of like the best female characters that I've ever seen portrayed on the screen, cuz like she's very complicated, like she's a very sexual creature, but she only wants it when she wants it, which is fair. And she's rough, she's tough, but she's also very vulnerable. Like there's that scene, the whole film is basically her journey in dealing with this divorce. And of course, they have a daughter together who's like 15, and she's very precocious. And there's she's dealing with having to be dating again. She hadn't been with another man for 17 years, and she's having to deal with that craziness. There's scene where she has a lunch date with somebody, and they take a cab back. She's going home, but he's like, "Well, let me take you home." And then, dude tries to pull a fast one, and she goes absolutely fucking nuts. Now, granted, does seem a bit of an overreaction, but dude did come in a little hot. I mean, read the room, motherfucker. I mean, this chick is clearly not ready to fuck you. You know, she does get to that point though, because she see one of the worst therapists I've ever seen in a fucking movie. And of course therapy's trash anyways, and fucking um ask her, why you seem angry that I'm asking you all these questions about your sex life. She's a very strong woman. She doesn't take no shit. Of course, she quits that shit, and just finds the real therapy that she has is her group of friends, which is some of the most beautiful scenes because you just see women being women. Especially for a film written and directed by a man, Paul Mazursky specifically, who's not really known for like very mature writing. He's kind of like if Woody Allen wasn't such a dipshit. Because his previous film, something like Bloom in Love, is a pile of shit, and Bob and Carol, Ted and Alice, just it's whatever. It's like The Graduate. It's important for its time, not necessarily something that holds up. And Alex in Wonderland's a pile of shit. Harry and Tonto is really the only beautiful film other than this one because it's so strong and very well written. The performances are absolutely amazing. Like Jill Clayburgh is great, and the group of female friends that she has is very important because you really get to see raw, emotional women, that aren't overacted, overstated, even like I said, even written by a man, it's very mature. Something like you didn't really in the 70s see that good of female characters unless Cassavetes was making a movie and he cast his wife Gina Rowlands in it. There was very few, save for maybe a Jane Fonda or a Faye Dunaway. You didn't see this much, and also like that she ends up finally like she bangs it out with some dipshit that she knows from the fucking art gallery that she works at, and then she ends up banging an artist played by the great Alan Bates, and they kind of start a little whirlwind romance. But the best thing for me is that ending, because she just says, because he wants her to go to Vermont with him and all this stuff. They basically wants to be, a real thing, and she says, no, I can't do it. I gotta do my own thing. And he leaves that painting with her. She's carrying it all through New York, and she decides to just leave that motherfucker, and then the movie ends. But it's so beautiful to see a woman taking charge of her own shit without being vindictive about it, just being her own person. Even when like Michael Murphy wants to come back, she says, no, not doing it. Just because you fucked up, you can't get a pass. Even like something when she first gets to going through the divorce, and she's walking out of a place. Dude says hello to her. She's like, "Fuck you." This woman don't take no shit. This is one of the greatest female characters that I've ever seen in a film. And we move on to Hugh Wilson's The First Wives Club, which is, it's more of a comedy than An Unmarried Woman. It's definitely not, there's some drama, but it's always played for laughs. Whereas like An Unmarried Woman's more of a drama, but it's actually pretty fucking funny. Just some of the fucking scenarios that happen, and some of just the bullshit that comes out of people's mouths. But The First Wives Club is already absurd because you got it. The whole movie comes together after Stockard Channing jumps off a fucking ledge because her dude divorced her and then married some hot young thing and stuff, which is, first of all, woman is like killing herself, especially a woman like Stockard Channing. Who the fuck is killing themselves over some fucking man when she can just fucking get back? And then that spawns a whole, like, all of her friends from college, played by Diane Keaton, Goldie Hawn, and Bette Midler, to get together to start a group because they're all divorced too. All a bunch of shitbags that traded them in for younger models and stuff. And like I said, the film is not as good. One, because these women are so malicious and fake towards each other. That's like, I know women do that, but it's like, how many fucking times we gotta see that in a fucking movie? Whereas like something like An Unmarried Woman is, very well done. That friend group, they're not malicious. They may talk a little shit, but they're there for each other. They don't have to slap each other around or like belittle each other just to fucking form a connection, because like they're one of the most beautiful scenes I've seen in a film is where one of the friend groups in An Unmarried Woman, she's on lithium now, and she had been going through some shit, and she's talking about her life, and then talking about all the ups and downs and stuff, and Joe Clayburgh just gives her a hug. There's no long monologue. There's no fucking, you need to do this, you need to do that. No, just gives her a fucking hug. And fucking, they do all that shit in The First Wives Club to get back at their ex-husbands and shit. And they open a fucking center for but like, it's just a fucking bullshit film. I mean, it's a waste of great actors, but that just goes to show you the differences between the 70s and the 90s. Because in the 70s, these women were doing exceptional work. Bette Midler was incredible in The Rose, directed by Mark Rydell. Diane Keaton, of course, was, Woody Allen's muse in the 70s, shit like Annie Hall and Manhattan. And then even Goldie Hawn was doing like great, well, I mean, Foul Play. That was Foul Play versus Bird on Wire, my little Goldie matchup. Granted, Bird on Wire is better than Foul Play. Foul Play's a pile of trash, but she's in shit like Shampoo, where she actually act. But now she just, and that whole thing with the fucking, that whole, you gotta look good, you want to play young when you're old and shit. And it's like, you can't age gracefully. Not everything's a fucking. You don't just jump from being hot to old. I guess for women you do, but you know what? That you get around that shit. You look at Meryl Streep, and when you're playing the same age for fucking 30 years. So I gotta give this one to an unmarried woman because one, the acting is way fucking better. Like there's no bad actors in the First Wives Club. They're just not used to their full potential. They play on their kind of stereotypes, so to speak, instead of actually getting a great performance out of them. And second of all, the way women are portrayed in an unmarried woman is a lot fucking better. You know, they're more human beings than caricatures. And in the First Wives Club, they're nothing but caricatures. And you kind of fall in line with the comedy shit. But there's ways of doing comedy shit where it's more real and not fucking caricatures and shit. As well as like the shrinks too. Forgot them. You got Marsha Gay Harden in um fucking First Wives Club, who's the hottest shrink I've ever seen since before fucking Dr. Melfi in The Sopranos. And of course, the husband's banging the shrink. Fuck. Ridiculous. Shit's just fucking ridiculous. Makes that fucking dumbass shrink and unmarried woman, seem a little more plausible. But anyways, like I said, I got to give this round to an unmarried woman all around because it's just a better fucking movie. Like this is what the '70s was all about. Serious filmmaking that was actually entertaining. Some of the best acting, writing, directing you could ever ask for. So instead of just bullshit caricatures where it's like, let's just make fun of everything because what's the fucking point? The world's coming to an end. And it didn't. And then we're still, look where we are now. Just it's always coming to an end, but it never fucking ends. Win, anyways. For anybody keeping score, that is 98-80. '70s are up by 18 again because, man, they just fucking pow, pow, pow. Fucking the '70s kick motherfucking ass. My money's still on the greatest decade of all time, but it could go the other way. We still got a long way to go. I got millions of matchups. I may be doing this shit till I'm in the fucking nursing home, but I got to know. Who knows what the final score will be. And if I've said anything wrong, anything you disagree with, feel free to eviscerate me in the comments. I don't really give a fuck. I'm doing this as a long, self-indulgent journey to see which decade was better for movies, the '70s or the '90s. But if you do comment, I'm gonna respond back because you know what? I'm clearly passionate about this. This is like what 179 or something that I've done of these. So I'm clearly obsessed. If you can't tell by all the insanity that's just zooming through this frame. But, you know, if you want for all you feminists out there, women are real people, believe it or not.